At the very end of 2025, just as many American wheat farmers were beginning to believe the worst was behind them, an unexpected message arrived. China had canceled a confirmed order, not postponed, not renegotiated, canceled outright. The deal involved 130,000 tons of U.S. white wheat, valued at roughly $30 million US dollars. The grain was already accounted for. The supply chain was in motion. For farmers in states like Kansas and Oklahoma, this shipment represented something far more important than a line item on a balance sheet. It symbolized hope. What made the decision even more shocking was its timing. Less than 2 months earlier, China had resumed purchasing American agricultural products after a long pause. U.S. officials called it a positive signal. Farmers saw it as the possible beginning of recovery after years of uncertainty. But that optimism didn't last. Instead, this cancellation may be only the first step in a much broader shift, one that could reshape global grain markets, redirect billions of dollars in trade, and once again place American farmers on the front line of geopolitical confrontation. So why did China suddenly walk away from U.S. wheat? And if American grain is pushed aside, who stands ready to take its place? America's overlooked power. Agriculture. The United States is usually described in terms of its military strength, its financial influence, or its technological dominance. But beneath those headlines lies another pillar of American power, one that is often underestimated. Agriculture. By 2025, the U.S. had roughly 188,000 square kilometers dedicated to wheat cultivation alone. Wheat ranks as the country's third most important crop, trailing only corn and soybeans. Geographically, American wheat production stretches across what is known as the Wheat Belt. Winter wheat dominates the central Great Plains, white wheat is concentrated in the Pacific Northwest, and spring wheat thrives in the northern states. Together, these regions produce approximately 50 million tons of wheat each year. That may sound modest compared to global totals, roughly 7% of worldwide production. But there is a crucial difference. The United States exports nearly half of what it grows. In 2024 alone, U.S. wheat exports were valued at more than $5.9 billion. Among the major buyers was China, a market that American farmers have long viewed as both lucrative and strategically vital. A paradox. Why China buys wheat at all? At first glance, China importing wheat might seem unnecessary. After all, China is the largest wheat producer on Earth, harvesting around 140 million tons annually, nearly 3 times U.S. output. So why import anything? The answer lies in specialization. China's domestic wheat is primarily used for staple consumption. But its rapidly modernizing food industry, industrial bakeries, instant noodles, frozen foods, and high-end flour products requires specific protein levels and quality standards. Certain U.S. wheat varieties fit these needs better than domestic alternatives. For years, American exporters benefited from this niche demand. In 2022, following adjustments to the Phase 1 trade framework, China dramatically increased purchases of U.S. wheat, importing 2.8 million tons worth roughly $900 million. For American farmers, it was a rare bright spot. But that moment didn't last. War, currency, and the price of distance. Beginning in late 2022, global wheat markets entered a period of intense volatility. The primary driver was the war in Eastern Europe. Before the conflict, Russia and Ukraine together accounted for nearly 30% of global wheat exports. As fighting disrupted ports, logistics corridors, and production itself, supply tightened and prices surged. For U.S. exporters, this created a serious problem. American wheat must travel vast distances to reach Asia. Freight costs are high, shipping times are long, and logistics are complex. When prices rise globally, these disadvantages become more visible. At the same time, the US dollar strengthened sharply between 2022 and 2023. Because agricultural commodities are priced in dollars, a stronger currency made US wheat more expensive for foreign buyers, especially when compared to alternatives from Australia, Russia, or South America. China noticed. By 2023, China's wheat sourcing strategy had clearly changed. That year, China imported nearly 7 million tons of wheat from Australia, which accounted for more than half of its total wheat imports. For the first time, China also began importing wheat from Russia, although, only in small volumes initially. U.S. wheat imports fell sharply to around 920,000 tons. That's a decline of nearly 2 million tons compared to the year before. The trend actually accelerated in 2024, when China canceled approximately 500,000 tons of U.S. wheat orders. Officially, these cancellations were framed as commercial decisions. But, unofficially, many analysts pointed to rising political tensions, including tariffs and export controls imposed by Washington. U.S. soybeans soon faced similar treatment. By mid-2025, American farmers were once again asking the same question they had asked years earlier: are we being priced out or pushed out? Then, in October, something unexpected happened. Chinese and American officials met for the fifth round of economic and trade talks in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. The agenda was broad: tariffs, export restrictions, technology controls, but agriculture featured pretty prominently. The talks produced limited but tangible results. One of the most important outcomes was China's agreement to resume purchases of U.S. agricultural products. In November, orders began to flow again. China purchased more than 200,000 tons of U.S. wheat, prompting the U.S. Department of Agriculture to publicly note that this marked China's first major wheat purchase in over a year. For many farmers, it felt like a turning point, until it wasn't. Less than 2 months later, Chinese buyers abruptly canceled 130,000 tons of that wheat. The grain was sourced primarily from Kansas and Oklahoma. Delivery was scheduled for June 2026. Many farmers had already planted their fields, counting on that demand. The cancellation wasn't random. In December, Washington approved an $11.1 billion arms package to Taiwan, including missile systems and M109A7 self-propelled howitzers, the largest such sale in U.S. history. In Beijing, this crossed a line. Why politics matters more than price. On Taiwan, China has been, unambiguous. It views foreign military involvement as direct interference in its internal affairs. Economic retaliation has become one of its preferred tools for signaling that displeasure. Lithuania learned this lesson earlier. In 2021, the Baltic nation allowed the establishment of a Taiwan representative office rather than using the more neutral Taipei designation. The wording mattered. China responded swiftly. Lithuanian exports to China collapsed by nearly 70%. Goods were rejected at ports. Orders vanished. Even worse, China pressured multinational firms, particularly German automakers, not to use Lithuanian-made components. Because Lithuania occupied a replaceable position in global supply chains, it had little leverage. Factories closed, partnerships dissolved. The country was gradually pushed to the margins of European manufacturing networks. The losses far exceeded direct trade figures. Beijing had sent its message. American farmers caught in the middle. Now, many see the U.S. wheat cancellation as part of the same playbook. For farmers, the consequences are immediate and personal. Wheat is planted months before it is sold. Cash flow planning is meticulous. Loans cover land leases, seeds, fertilizer, machinery maintenance, storage, and transport. When a major buyer disappears suddenly, there is no easy replacement. Grain cannot be rerouted overnight. Prices fall. Storage fills up. Debt remains. Some farmers still remember what happened to soybeans during earlier trade disputes. Silos full, buyers gone, margins crushed. And once trust in a market is broken, it is difficult to rebuild. If not America, then who? China, of course, will not stop importing wheat. It will simply import it from somewhere else. In December 2025, a cargo ship carrying 65,000 tons of Argentine wheat departed from the port of Timbuktu, bound for China. It marked Beijing's first wheat import from Argentina in more than 3 decades. The timing was no coincidence. Argentina's new president, Javier Milei, had just announced a reduction in wheat export taxes from 9.5% to 7.5%. In global grain markets, even a small tax cut can translate into massive savings when volumes reach millions of tons. At the same time, the Buenos Aires Grain Exchange projected Argentina's 2026 wheat harvest at 27.7 million tons, the largest in the country's history. High output, lower taxes, competitive pricing. From a buyer's perspective, the decision is straightforward. The bigger picture. This story is not really about wheat. It is about how deeply global trade has become entangled with geopolitics. For decades, economic logic suggested that markets would eventually override political disagreements. Today, the opposite often seems true. Trade has become leverage, supply chains have become pressure points, and farmers, often far removed from policy decisions, bear the consequences. The cancellation of a single wheat order may seem minor in a world of trillion-dollar economies. But for the people who planted those fields, it represents uncertainty, risk, and a growing realization that international politics can reach all the way down to the soil beneath their feet. As global competition intensifies and alliances shift, one question remains unresolved. In a world where food is increasingly strategic, who can farmers truly rely on, and at what cost? And that is the question shaping the future of global agriculture.